إن الحمد لله الذي خلق بيده البشر وصوره فأحسن صوره ورزقه من الطيبات وكرمه أمام الملائكة وفضله على كثير ممن خلق تفضيلا. فتبارك الله أحسن الخالقين. وهو الذي خلق السماوات والأرض في 6 أيام وكان عرشه على الماء ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. فتبارك الله رب العرش الكريم. هو الحي لا إله إلا هو فادعوه مخلصين له الدين. الحمد لله رب العالمين. له الحمد في الأولى والآخرة وله الحكم وإليه ترجعون. ونصلي ونسلم على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، سيد الأولين والآخرين وخاتم النبيين والمرسلين ورحمة للعالمين، بشيرا ونذيرا بين يدي الساعة. فالذين آمنوا به وعزروه ونصروه واتبعوا النور الذي أنزل معه أولئك هم المفلحون. ومن يعص الله ورسوله ويتعدى حدوده يدخله نارا وكان ذلك على الله يسيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم إن زلزلة الساعة شيء عظيم. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم واخشوا يوما لا يجزي والد عن ولده ولا مولود هو جاز عن والده شيئا إن وعد الله حق فلا تغرنكم الحياة الدنيا ولا يغرنكم بالله الغرور. ثم أما بعد. What makes any of us frightened or terrified? Is it the darkness? Or is it something as small and insignificant as an insect? There are many things that make the human being afraid. Sometimes the fear is illogical. Sometimes it's just psychological. But sometimes the fear is real. That something happens that causes you to have that reaction inside. What is the difference then between being frightened and being terrified? My dear respected brothers and sisters, when a person at a concert targets thousands of people and tries to slaughter 500 of them unsuccessfully, but kills so many and injured so many, does that make you afraid to go to a concert? What if you were in Bataclan, in the darkness of a concert, somebody opens fire inside the concert hall, kills many, scores of people? Would that make you afraid? How would you feel if you went to the grocery shop or someplace like Walmart and somebody walked in at the checkout aisle and he just shot people and he left? Will that make you afraid to go shopping? What about your children at school? When a gunman enters the school and murders 26 of them, going from class to class, children ages 6 and above, would that make them afraid to go to school? What about Columbine? What about Blacksburg, Virginia Tech? We now have certain things that happen in the most common places, whether you're jogging out in the open in New York City, whether you're running in a marathon in Boston, Whether you have work with your co-workers, the next guy that gets fired decides to come back for revenge. All these acts, we can all agree, will make us all fearful and terrified of going out. And that is why if you look to the dictionary, the word terror is defined as intense fear. The type of fear that paralyzes you, makes you afraid to even move or to do anything. That makes you in perpetual anxiety. That if you move, you are next. That is what terror is, according to the dictionary. And that is something that we can all say, yes, we have felt terror in our hearts for something. But sadly, dear respected brothers and sisters, all those acts that terrify people are not classified as terrorism, except only in one case. So, my dear respected brothers and sisters, why is it that somebody with the name Abdullah, Muhammad, Karim, why is it if that person commits a criminal act, it is labeled as terrorism when somebody by the name of Jack, Michael, or Devin, they would do something 10 times worse, and we will never call it terrorism? Have you ever seen such subjective bias over something that we can all agree will terrify all of us? Why is that? It's because we've forgotten history. What's the history of the word terrorism? When did we first, as human beings, use the term terrorist? When? If you look to the very dictionary, the word started to be used in the late 18th century. The tactic of spreading fear against the population was used in a very specific country. That country and others like it, the same ones that framed the term terrorism today, were the ones who began the acts of terrorism as we know them today. Does that even make you surprised? The countries that defined terrorism were the biggest perpetrators of terrorist acts historically. They used terrorism against the people for their political gains. Sometimes it is in the name of a revolution. Sometimes it is committed by a state actor. What we used to know as terrorism yesterday are now considered legal actions. So what you know today as terrorism, which was permissible before, is only reserved for a specific group of people. My dear respected brothers and sisters, there is something very unique about the Quran. And that is the word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses that we can say, we can maybe loosely translate to terror. Has never been used by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the context of using it against the civilian population. Ever. SubhanAllah. And the Quran uses two terms. One that could mean fright, and the other that could mean terror. It's really, really amazing how violent extremists can sometimes use the Quran to quote it as their justification for such criminal acts which Allah has forbidden. So terrorism knows no religion. It's not unique to a specific ideology. It was a tactic that is simply used to intimidate a civilian population to obtain something or attain a goal. Whether it is ideological, whether it is political, whether it is religious. It doesn't matter what the reason is. The tactic has a purpose. But today, that label is only reserved for whoever's name is Muhammad, Abdullah, or Karim. Not Jack, not Michael, not Devin. So, dear respected brothers and sisters, mankind is doing a lot to one another. We are acting the way the angels feared when they said, أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ. Terrorism, look at it. It is what? يَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ. Subhanallah. To spread corruption and shed blood is what terrorism is. The Malaika said this. The first time Allah mentioned the idea of mankind. أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ. That's what terrorism does. Kill people, shed blood, and spread corruption. It makes people fear. It makes people terrified. Who started this? It's been started a long time ago. It's happened for centuries and millennia. I don't want us to go so far back in the past. Let's go into the recent past. The French Revolution. That's when we started using the word terrorist and terrorism. The French, the peace-loving, liberty-loving people, used terrorism as a tactic during the French Revolution. Thousands of people were executed that were just simply here to be a political rival. Some of them executed in the guillotine, political opponents. Just like that, to make people fear not to be sent. That's when the word was coined, terrorist. It's not only the French. Also in Russia, there was a known individual that started a group, Sergei. And his group would do acts of terrorism. That, they believe, ends justify means. They wrote a book that today many terrorist organizations, they follow. That playbook. A catechism. Subhanallah. That's not there. What about the Irish Brotherhood? The Irish Revolutionary Brotherhood. All of this in the late 18th century, early 19th century. These are organized groups of people that committed known acts of terrorism. The IRA, blowing up bombs. Why? They had a political aim to that. So you see that the precedent to this terrorism has been committed by every group of non-Muslims. Whether it is an organization, a group, or a state. There's also state terrorism, where one state will terrorize another in the name of war. How many soldiers were killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? How many soldiers? Maybe zero? Hundreds of thousands of human beings faced their death in a very terroristic way. We can all agree. These are not my assessment. This is assessment of intellectuals, scholars, philosophers. That terrorism has no name or face. That it does not belong to one specific group or person. States have used it, organizations have used it, groups of people have used it. It's a tactic that people use to get to some certain aim. That's the history of terrorism. Look it up. The only thing is that when human beings forget, as soon as something happens, all it takes is one person or politician to label it terrorist. And then everybody started thinking they know what it is. In America, there are many acts, violent acts of terrorism that have occurred. But it took till 9/11 for the national conscience to associate it with Islam and Muslims. University of Maryland at College Park, they have a documented history of terrorist cases in America. Most of them have been perpetrated by white Christians. The majority of them are perpetrated by white Christians. Nobody calls them terrorists. They only remember the acts of Muhammad, Abdullah, and Khalid to be terrorists. So, my dear respected brothers and sisters, it looks like somebody has defined it specifically so that way it only fits us as a description for their political aims. When the history of terrorism has already shown us who the biggest terrorists are. In France, in Russia, in Italy, in the United Kingdom, all of them have unspeakable acts of terrorism that you cannot believe. None of them cite that as an example. But I'm not worried about disbelievers. I'm worried about people who claim to be Muslim, who think that on certain circumstances you are justified to do such acts of terrorism. When you ask that depraved, sick-minded individual consider themselves Muslim, why do you do this? Sometimes they quote you an ayah from Quran. They sometimes do. And I want to mention then a few ayat, since they like to quote the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Two words that you find in the Quran, one of them could mean fright, and the other one means terror. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, take for example, Musa alayhi salam. When Musa alayhi salam, he came to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the first time, Allah called his attention. His first meeting with Allah, Allah showed him his power. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, what's that in your hand? وَمَا تِلْكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا مُوسَى. What's in your hand? قَالَ هِيَ عَصَايَ. It's my staff. أَتَوَكَّلُ عَلَيْهَا. I use it, I lean upon it. I drive my cattle with it. And I use it for other things. Allah says, throw it. أَلْقِهَا يَا مُوسَى. Musa dropped it. It became فَإِذَا هِيَ حَيَّةٌ تَسْعَى. It became a serpent, a live serpent. Musa, he was so frightened. You know what he did? وَلَّا مُدْبِرًا وَلَمْ يُعَقِّبْ. He turned and he ran and he didn't look back. That's how frightened he was. Then Allah, to make him to keep calm, Allah called him back. Ya Musa aqbil wala takhaf. Respond, don't be afraid. You'll be safe. Then Allah told him, Usluk yadaka fi jaybik. Takhruj bayda'a min ghayri su'. Put your hand against your body. When you bring it down, it becomes white. وَاضْمُمْ إِلَيْكَ جَنَاحَكَ مِنَ الرَّحْمِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, hold yourself tightly so that way your fright will go away. The term Allah used, rahb. Rahba is a type of fright, of fear, something individual. So that's a real perceived threat to a person. The snake. So Musa felt afraid. But that same term that makes somebody fear for their safety, because the snake makes every human being fear because you fear the safety, the harm that a snake will cause you. I don't know why human beings fear the snake. Either by being constricted by it, by grabbed by it. They are very fearful creatures. Most human beings fear snakes. I still don't know why. So he had a physical fear of something. Allah called it rahmah. At the same time, for those of us who have taqwa, so much so that we really, really, really perceive a fear that if we're not dutiful to Allah, we will be punished. It makes us change our ways. Allah also calls that rahmah. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described the Anbiya this way. أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ يُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ وَيَدْعُونَنَا رَغَبًا وَرَهَبًا وَكَانُوا لَنَا خَاشِعِينَ. That the Anbiya, they are the ones who are the utmost in doing good deeds. يُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ وَيَدْعُونَنَا. And they call upon Allah رَغَبًا, with so much yearning. They call upon Allah fervently. وَرَهَبًا. They call upon Allah also scared that their prayers will not be answered, their good deeds will be fruitless, or that Allah might punish them. Rahaba. When Allah, and that is in Surah Al-Anbiya, when Allah called upon Bani Israel, when He commissioned Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he entered Al-Madinah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Al-Baqarah, Ya Bani Israel, Ya Bani Israel, اذكروا نعمتي التي أنعمت عليكم وَأَوْفُوا بِعَهْدِي أُوفِ بِعَهْدِكُمْ وَإِيَّايَ فَارْهَبُونَ. Allah says, fulfill my covenant and I'll fulfill my promises to you, and you should have fear of me. وَإِيَّايَ فَارْهَبُونَ. That's how Allah uses the term fright. And that is something personal that you experience against a physical threat or in response to your Lord. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala went further to say to the Muslims. And this ayah is quoted by some sick-minded Muslims. Surah Al-Anfal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when He commanded the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the companions to get ready, that they will be attacked by the kuffar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ وَمِن رِبَاطِ الْخَيْلِ تُرْهِبُونَ بِهِ عَدُوَّ اللَّهِ وَعَدُوَّكُمْ. Allah says, and prepare with your best ability of your strength and with the horses and archers and cavalry, so that you can frighten your enemy and Allah's enemy. Your preparation should be used to frighten them. Sometimes, imagine somebody wants to attack you. If they know that you're well prepared for the attack, what do? They cancel the attack. They're afraid to attack. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, frighten them by your preparation. Some Sikh Muslims see, Allah says you can terrorize them. I have heard this myself from the lips of a Muslim, sick-minded Muslim, saying that Allah sanctioned terrorism. Without that stupid fool not knowing the context of the word terrorist or terrorism, where it started from, and that is a tactic that is already un-Islamic. Allah said, frighten your enemies by your preparation. But when Allah talk about casting terror, you know what Allah said? When Quraysh decided to attack the Muslims, few Muslims, weak, qalil, mustad'afin, Allah described them. In Badr, you know what Allah said? إِذْ يُوحِي رَبُّكَ إِلَى الْمَلَائِكَةِ أَنِّي مَعَكُمْ فَثَبِّتُوا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا سَأُلْقِي فِي قُلُوبِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا الرُّعْبَ. Ar-ru'b is terror. Allah says, I will put it in the hearts of those who disbelieve for coming against to destroy Muslims. Ar-ru'b is something which Allah controls and can cast in the hearts of those that are oppressive, of those that are tyrannical, of those that punish the believers. Allah said, سَأُلْقِي فِي قُلُوبِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا الرُّعْبَ. In Al Imran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said again, سَنُلْقِي فِي قُلُوبِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا الرُّعْبَ بِمَا أَشْرَكُوا بِاللَّهِ مَا لَمْ يُنَزِّلْ بِهِ سُلْطَانًا. Allah is the one that casts terror in the hearts of those that disbelieve. Because by that terror, Allah makes them waver and not do maximum damage to the believers. Fright, to be scared. And ru'b, that is terror. That's how Allah used it in His book. That terrorism is not a tactic for any of us to use, but a condition Allah will put in the hearts of those who disbelieve. And that the only thing a Muslim, a believer should do is to prepare. أَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ وَمِن رِبَاطِ الْخَيْلِ. That will be sufficient. Allah will make them frightened. For a Muslim to now copy what the French have done, what the Russians have done, what the Irish have done, the Italians, every single one of them, and consider it justified, is a Muslim that has not read the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And let it be clear, terrorism is the act of disbelievers. And any of us who copy such acts may end up being a disbeliever. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين ثم أما بعد. Dear respected brothers and sisters, Allah's book is perfect, and the Sunnah of His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam is, his history, his actions are clear, and they represent the best example of a human being in the context of armed conflict, war, and political games. Now take, for example, why do people use acts of terrorism? If you notice, a government will terrorize the population when they want to subdue the population. Or an individual or group of people or an organization working within a country will use acts of terrorism to bring social change. How did then Allah change Mecca? The Muslims were in Mecca, a small group of people, few. There's already a political order in Mecca. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the believers in Mecca, Kuffu aydiyakum wa aqimu salata wa atu zakah. Hold back your hands. Do not get into retaliatory attacks. Establish a salah and a zakah. Establish worship. The object of Islam is not to worry about the political order. That will change itself, not by violence or force. Then Allah allowed the Muslims to leave Mecca. Today, when you are a Muslim living as a minority anywhere, somebody will tell you it's okay for you to drive your car and kill people that are jogging. And well, by the way, they don't have to be Americans. Actually, most of the people killed in the New York, in the Manhattan attack were foreigners just here. Random people. Completely random people. So in Islam, you have to look to the Quran and the Sunnah and realize that as a minority anywhere, Kuffu aydiyakum wa aqimu salah. We could barely pray together in America, all the Muslims, there are millions of us here. And yet we have not established a salah nationwide. We have to pray in corners. We have to rent small spaces. We have to establish this place, loud Islamic center, so that people can come here and pray. We haven't done that yet. And then when the Muslims were in Al-Madinah, when they now have a community, Allah did not send them to Mecca to go overthrow the government of Mecca. Allah made them establish themselves as a complete Islamic society. And when Muslims are attacked, Allah gave them the rules of engagement. Allah is the one. When the Muslims came to Mecca, Allah made the rules of engagement which no army has. وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. Only fight those who fight you, and do not transgress. When somebody surrenders, do not kill them. Subhanallah. When they stop fighting, Subhanallah. فَإِنِ انْتَهَوْا Subhanallah. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ. When they stop, you stop. When they surrender, you preserve them. Even at the time of war, only in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنْ أَحَدٌ مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ اسْتَجَارَكَ فَأَجِرْهُ حَتَّى يَسْمَعَ كَلَامَ اللَّهِ ثُمَّ أَبْلِغْهُ مَأْمَنَهُ. If one person from the enemy, subhanallah, or disbeliever, seek your assistance. You're in a time of war. A disbeliever that could potentially be the enemy. Seek your assistance. You have to help them so they can hear the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and let them go safely. Which army does that? When the Germans brought the Blitzkrieg against Britain, they just bombed the entire civilization. They did not care. This is how armies work. What happens when an army becomes victorious in taking over a place? When they have the upper hand, they rape, they pillage, they steal, they destroy. You know what Allah told the Muslims? When you finally have the upper hand, الَّذِينَ إِن مَّكَّنَّاهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ أَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ again. وَآتَوُا الزَّكَاةَ وَأَمَرُوا بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَنَهَوْا عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ وَلِلَّهِ عَاقِبَةُ الْأُمُورِ. The armies of the kuffar, they kill, they rape, they pillage. Look at what's happening in Myanmar. That's what they're doing to our Muslim brothers and sisters. When the Muslims have the upper hand, they're supposed to take care of the people. أقاموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة وأمروا بالمعروف ونهوا عن المنكر. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent his messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and ordered him to engage in jihad, not for political gain. When they finished in taking over Mecca, did he make himself the king of Mecca? He just left the people and he returned back to Al-Madinah. They asked him, they knew that he deserved his punishment because they persecuted him. What will you do to us now? He said, إِذْهَبُوا فَأَنْتُمُ الْخُلَفَاءُ. You're released today. I didn't come here to take your position. I came here to cleanse the masjid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no army, there is no leader in the face of this earth, in the history of mankind, that has done that except Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's the exalted sunnah he has, and yet a Muslim will look to the Quran and pick an ayah that says this ayah justifies a kafir's act of terrorism. When Allah said, "Man qatala nafsan bighayri nafsin aw fasadin fil ard, فَكَأَنَّمَا قَتَلَ النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا." If you kill one person wrongfully, it's like you kill every human being. Why would Allah say that? If it was justified for you to pick a random person to kill. Allah has never made it permissible to kill anyone just because they are disbelievers. Abadan, not in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not in the book of Allah. And not in the sunnah of His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What is happening, we have corrupt so-called imams and scholars and sheikhs. They are spreading fitna amongst the Muslims. They're preying upon ignorant Muslims. They quote them ayat that don't even say what it is that they say, and they tell them it's okay for you to strap a bomb on yourself and blow up a market, even if Muslims are there, to come into a musalla in the day of Jummah. How many masajid are bombed by somebody claiming to be a Muslim? How many? We are copying the depraved acts of disbelievers. Terrorism is a disbeliever's tactic who does not believe in the sanctity of life. That is why the Prophet ﷺ said, not only life of a human being should be preserved, even the life of a tree. You do not cut trees when you go out in jihad. You're not supposed to kill the horses. You're not supposed to just spread fasad. Allah says, وَقَاتِلُوهُمْ حَتَّى لَا تَكُونَ فِتْنَةً وَيَكُونَ الدِّينُ لِلَّهِ. You only fight to stop their fitna and to establish the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because through the deen of Allah, you have justice, safety, and security for everyone. That is the teaching of Islam. That is what Muslims forgot, and we allowed others to label us terrorists. Now it is time for us to remind everyone, according to the dictionary, according to history, who is a terrorist and what is terrorism. And the United States National Advisory Council in the United States, the National Advisory Committee for Criminal Justice Standards and Goals, says there are 6 categories of terrorism. One of them is political terrorism, the other one is non-political terrorism, and is when somebody uses acts of terrorism to intimidate people for their own ideology. All the killers in Texas, man walks into a church, murders 26 people. What act of terrorism is that not? People worshiping. Why? He has a certain ideology. He's Christian for sure. Well, we don't call him a terrorist. We wait. If the perpetrator is Muhammad, Abdullah, and Kareem, minutes after that, the media says this is a terrorist act. When his name is something else, we have spent weeks trying to figure out why the Las Vegas shooter did what he did. And in the end, they say, it's not an act of terrorism. It's a crime nonetheless. How shameful in the face of humanity we can slaughter human beings and not call it for what it is. It's okay, brothers and sisters. Just know one thing, and I want to warn you about one thing. And that is, there is an attempt to make you change your deed by labeling you and your deed terrorists. Allah says, وَلَا يَزَالُونَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ حَتَّى يَرُدُّوكُمْ عَنْ دِينِكُمْ إِنِ اسْتَطَاعُوا. They will never stop this campaign against you until you turn away from your deed. You know what Allah says? وَمَنْ يَرْتَدِدْ مِنْكُمْ عَنْ دِينِهِ فَيَمُوتْ وَهُوَ كَافِرٌ. If you turn away from your deed because of this, and you die a disbeliever. Allah says, فَأُولَٰئِكَ حَبِطَتْ أَعْمَالُهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. You waste all your deeds. It's time to be strong, brothers and sisters. We decry, we repudiate all acts of terrorism, regardless of who does it. We know clearly terrorism was not sanctioned by the Quran or the Sunnah or Islam, and we know that acts of terrorism are criminal in Islam, and terrorism has no religion. It has no people, it has no government, it is a tactic. And anybody can use it for whatever sick ideology they have. I am just appealing to all of us Muslims in America and elsewhere. Let us show people the exalted standards of Quran and Sunnah. Let us be the ones there to stop all terrorism of everyone in the entire world. Let us show people the value of the sanctity of life. Let us be the example like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam the example for any leader, for any nation, for any group. He is the epitome of all the best things human. Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas. Allah says you are the best ummah brought forth from mankind. If ta'muruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhawna 'anil munkar wa tu'minuna billah. If you enjoy what is good and forbid what is evil and believe in Allah, let us be the one that make humanity stop terrorism. Let's not listen to the political labels that they created so they can attack any of us with impunity. As long as you're labeled a terrorist, a government can come and arrest you and kill you with impunity. As long as you're labeled a terrorist, they can do anything to you they want to, no matter what or how innocent you are. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت وسلمت وباركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا شر ما قضيت فإنك تقضي بالحق ولا يقضى عليك اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين وانصر الإسلام والمسلمين واغفر لجميع موتى المسلمين يا عزيز يا كريم ربنا عليك توكلنا وإليك أنبنا وإليك المصير ربنا لا تجعلنا فتنة للذين كفروا واغفر لنا ربنا إنك أنت العزيز الحكيم ربنا اغفر لنا ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وأقيموا الصلاة فإن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر ولذكر الله أكبر الله يعلم ما تصنعون